Florida president, and then in my day job, I welcome you all to the hospital that I work at, Memorial Regional Hospital. I am the director over the cardiac and vascular service line. So again, thanks for being here. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the team of people who helped put this event on. They stay after hours and they make this all happen without blinking an eye. So thank you to our catering team, Amy and Deborah, and our wonderful chef Pierre, our IT team who stayed extra to make sure it goes off flawlessly, and of course our EBS team, and then John Pickett, our administrator here, and Peter, our CEO. Thank you for your support. So a little bit of information about ACHE in case you are not a member and not familiar with us, or if you are a member, and a little refresher. I want to thank all of our 2023 corporate sponsors. Our local chapter could not do what we do without our corporate sponsors. So thank you to our platinum sponsors, Lean Toss, who's actually on our panel tonight, Memorial Healthcare System, where we are, and then Nova Southeastern University, the Wayne Huizenga College of Business and Entrepreneurship. Our gold sponsors, Baptist Health South Florida, Baxter, Broward Health, D-Sinai, Jackson Health System, Nicholas Children's Hospital, FAU, the Executive Master of Health Administration Program, University of Miami, the Miami Herbert Business School, and Plant Moran. Our silver sponsors, Barry University, Cleveland Clinic, FIU, the College of Nursing and Health Sciences, and Vitas Healthcare. And then our bronze sponsors, BDO, HIMPROS, HOPCO, who's also on our panel tonight, Parkshore, and South Florida Hospital Healthcare Association. And then, of course, our media partners and supporters, the Broward County Medical Association, the Dade County Medical Association, and South Florida Hospital News and Healthcare Report. So just so you can see, this is a little map of our South Florida area, and this is all the locations of our sponsors. So really, really nice to have that support. So our mission is to advance our members in healthcare leadership excellence. I think ACHE does a great job of this, and it is the premier organization to be in for healthcare management and leadership. So I would like to thank our board. We are a board of 20 individuals. We are all volunteers who have day jobs, and this board really makes it happen. They come out to events, they plan these events and everything that goes on in the background. If you are a board member here tonight, please stand so we can recognize you and thank you. We have numerous board members and they're being honored. So thank you. At a national level, ACHE has 48,000 members, so this big healthcare world that is actually small in ways is you're connected with 48,000 individuals. There's 76 chapters, an abundance of education and web visits, and 8.8 million communications to our members. So at a national level, very strong. And then our local chapter is very robust. We're considered a large chapter at about 1,200 members, 139 fellows, and that number continues to grow. A great student membership base with 239 students. And then our LinkedIn followers, we have over 3,000. That continues to grow, and a great, probably the best source of information for you to get chapter news here. So just a little quick history. We were originally the South Florida Healthcare Executive Forum, founded in 1972. And then we became an affiliate with ACHE at a national level in 2004. We brought on the Treasure Coast in 2017. And then we did a whole rebrand in 2020 so that people knew that we were part of ACHE. So we became ACHE of South Florida. And you can see this is the areas that our members come out of, predominantly in Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. And then this is how you find us. So LinkedIn and our website, we have a lot of great events that are coming up in the future. I'll share with them in the end. And I just would like to recognize we do have a life fellow in the room, Ken Hetledge. He used to be one of our executives here at Memorial prior, but I think that goes to show, you know, the commitment and what this organization does. So thank you, Ken, for being here and being a life fellow. To call up Peter Powers, our CEO of Memorial Regional, just to give you a little background on our hospital. So thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Jenna, and I want to welcome you all to Memorial Regional Hospital. Believe it or not, the room that you're in during COVID had about 60 patients in it on 3 separate occasions. So this is a busy place. We are a level 1 trauma center. We like to say we're very flexible and adaptable here, but we're a large hospital, part of the Memorial Healthcare System. Memorial is the 3rd largest public healthcare system in the country, and we have 6 total hospitals. One of them is a pediatric hospital, Joe DiMaggio, which is also located on this campus across the street. And it's a pretty special thing because we have a lot of programs that go back and forth between peds and adults, and so having a level 1 trauma hospital with all the different tertiary quaternary services that are out there connected to a world-class children's hospital is a really special thing that we think sets us apart. But we have many programs to be proud of: cardiac, neurosciences, transplant. We do a huge number of births here. We do about 5,200 births a year. And so those are some of the programs that we're really proud of. But at the end of the day, the thing about Memorial is the culture and the people, and that's what we're most proud of, and that's what's kept really talented people like Ken Hetledge here for many years. And then that's what's brought some of us who are newer to the healthcare system here. I've been here almost 4 years, and so it's a very special place, and we're very excited to have you here tonight.
Welcome everyone. My name is Carlos Ayala and I serve as the educational chair for ACHE. And I want to make sure I thank somebody that is always helping us put these events together. Charles, who's walking down the... Like Jenna said, this doesn't happen without the effort of some of our board members, and Charles does a phenomenal job of putting this together. Next, I want to introduce Ashley Chaco, who will be our moderator today. Ashley serves as the Vice President for HEALHCARE, and her team looks at data and transfers data into actionable items who are shared with healthcare systems like ours, so we can grow our service line and strategy as well. Ashley has a Westwood Cleveland Clinic before joining HEALHCARE and served as many roles, such as Executive Director of Business, and she had experience in the neurosciences as well. So, Ashley, please come up here. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. I didn't realize you were going to memorize my bio. Unfortunately, I don't have the skills that you have. I don't have our panelists' bios memorized. But nonetheless, welcome. We are very excited to have you join us. I'd like to first introduce all of our panelists to my left. First, we have Robert Grayheck. He brings extensive clinical change management and healthcare system program development to his role as a clinical operations advisor at Lintas. His health system leadership and operations experience has provided him with the knowledge and the ability to utilize proven strategies and best practice for improving patient flow. In addition to serving the role of director, his responsibilities have included orchestrating the acquisition and implementation of patient care technology to improve patient flow within a healthcare. Prior to this role, Robert had several roles. While each role was very diverse, they all focused on cost management, performance improvement, and patient flow throughout the healthcare system. Robert holds a bachelor's degree in nursing from Southeast Missouri State University and a master's degree in business administration with a healthcare emphasis from William Woods University. Thank you, Robert, and welcome. Next, as you met, Peter Powers. Peter Powers is the CEO of Memorial Regional Hospital here, and we talked about Memorial Regional Hospital. Mr. Powers previously served as a CEO for St. Anthony Hospital, a level 1 trauma center in Denver, Colorado. St. Anthony is the flagship hospital of Centura Health, the busiest trauma center in the Rocky Mountain region and home of Life for Life, Colorado. Peter holds a Bachelor of Public Affairs with a minor in Business and Sociology from Indiana University, as well as a Master of Business Administration from the University of Sydney, Australia. He is a Fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives and is currently a member of the Broward Sheriff's Office Advisory Board, Broward Regional Health Planning Council Board of Directors, and the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Outside of work, Peter enjoys spending time with his family, along with mixed martial arts, endurance sports, and reading. Thank you, Peter, and welcome. Last but not least, we have Richard M. Klass. Richard Klass has 30 years of national and international management, consulting, strategic planning, and market research experience. He is a frequent lecturer on business topics, well-authored, and served as faculty to the University of Miami School of Business and as an instructor for Florida State University Jim Moran Institute for Global Entrepreneurship. Richard is the founder of 2CY Inc. and co-founder of KCI Partners Inc. He was formerly the Senior Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer for Jackson Health System, Worldwide Director for Market Research for Johnson & Johnson, and in the consulting practice of Price Waterhouse. Richard's experience encompasses every major healthcare setting, including hospitals, high-technology medical devices, bioscience organizations, managed care organizations, not-for-profit agencies, medical practices, and associations. He's worked with senior leadership to develop strategic initiatives, improve competitive positions, lay the foundation for capital acquisition, and incorporate voice of customer feedback into product development and operational improvement initiatives. Richard holds both master's and bachelor's degrees in business administration from the University of Miami. Thank you and welcome, Richard. As a moderator, now that we have all the degrees, where you've been working, all of that, let's get to the fun stuff. What kind of moderator would I be without starting with some fun icebreaker questions? So first, what do your family and friends think you do all day? Richard, do you want to start?
Okay. First, I have to make sure that I know how to work the microphone. That's probably the key thing, right? Learning how to do this. I'm sorry, I'm not one to want to sit behind a desk too much. So the answer is kind of bifurcated. Okay? I've got a whole cohort of people, yeah. So some people think I just sit behind my desk all day, getting ready to burn out from my computer and doing research. Some people think that I'm on the phone all day talking to friends and family. And then there's others that think that I only do what my wife wants me to do. It's more probably that than anything else. And then sometimes she'll ask me some great questions that I have to answer, like how certain things in the stock market work or what's competitive intelligence and that type of stuff. So anyway, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I very much look forward to engaging in some conversations this evening.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Well, if you ask my 16-year-old or my 11-year-old, and probably my wife, I professionally attend meetings all day. But to be honest, we give a lot of ourselves at work. I certainly do, and I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing things. So I actually don't talk a lot about work at home. With kids, you try to make that really sincere effort to be present when you're here. So basically attend meetings, but when people ask me what is my favorite thing about what I do, it's literally that no 2 days are the same. And really, one of the amazing things about working in a place like this is you can be having a meeting with a neurosurgeon one minute and then literally talking to a housekeeper the next. And so, again, I keep going back to healthcare is a people business, and the people are really the best things about what we get to do every day.
That's great. Robert, what about you?
So I always think that's an interesting question. And so I have a 17-year-old son at home, and I thought about it, and one of the things he says to me, he goes, "Dad, what do you do now? You used to be a nurse." So he doesn't really know. Right now they think that I go downstairs because I work from home most of the time, and sit in my office and I have Zoom meetings. And that's really what they believe that I do 24/7. You got another meeting? You got another meeting? And they don't understand that really there's a whole lot more to it, in the sense that I have the privilege of working with systems and really helping them optimize their outcomes, and utilizing a lot of the generative AI predictive prescriptive data. And so it's a lot of fun. But if you ask them, I watch Zoom meetings all day. That's what I do.
Well, at least you're not just on your computer all day like my 8-year-old and my 3-year-old thing, so it's better than that. Okay, so I just have one more question and I'm done torturing you guys. What bucket list item do you most want to check off in the next 6 months?
It's a great question. I don't know if I'm going to get to it in the next 6 months or not. But I think the TV shows on television are really pretty crappy. And so I think on my bucket list is to try to write a TV series. Whether I'll get to it or not, I don't know, but that's on my bucket list.
That's okay, we'll give you 12 months then.
So for me, that's pretty easy. I was actually born and raised in Austria, and the last time I was over there, we were supposed to go in and COVID hit. So I haven't seen some of my family in a few years. So in the next 6 months, I'll be traveling back with my wife and just to see some family. So that's pretty exciting for us.
For me, I love to run, so I have a goal to qualify for the Boston Marathon in the next 6 months. And the reason I'm specifically excited about that is I have a birthday coming up in March. And in March, I get 5 more minutes because I go up into a different age group. So I've been waiting for this for 5 years, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, these are the things we look forward to.
Yeah, so this is a good birthday.
Good. Awesome. Okay. So thank you for that. I feel like you get more insight, when you get those personal questions. So I really appreciate you guys giving forward those thoughts. So let's get to it. So Richard, when you talk about organizational change, in your experience, what are the top 2 to 3 most effective drivers of organizational change?
Thanks for the question and getting me to start out first. I like going last, but that's okay. So I think I would put this into one big bucket called the external environment. And those of you that have been in healthcare for a while know that we're in an industry that is constantly changing. I mean, there's just so many things that are going on that make us pivot what we're doing today, may not necessarily what we're doing tomorrow. So let's talk first maybe about the state of Florida. There used to be something called certificate of need laws. How many of you guys have heard about certificate of need laws? Yeah, most of you have. So it regulated things like new hospitals, where you could put them up, you had to show need. So now all of a sudden the state of Florida says, nope, certificate of need laws are all gone. And so now where Memorial Hospital, as an example, had great competitive success because it controlled all of the hospitals around Griffin Road south to the Dade County line. Now all of a sudden a competitor can come in and find an area that they can put in a micro hospital that maybe just focuses on cardiology or on cancer care, which are the traditional drivers of profitability. So what does that do? Now hospitals have to start thinking, how do I change to adapt to that kind of environment? And what do I have to do to keep competitors out? Probably the biggest driver is the federal government, and specifically as it relates to reimbursement. So just as an example, we had DRGs first, where we moved from a cost base. Now all of a sudden they're saying, hey, we don't care what your cost is, we're only going to pay you a certain amount of money. And if that patient is in longer, guess what? You're going to lose money. And if you can get them out quicker, then you're going to make more money. Then the law changes again, saying, hey, now you have to worry about readmission rates. So now hospitals have to change again, saying, okay, not only do I have to get patients out, but now we have to start worrying about the quality of care that we're giving and we have to make sure that they don't come back. Then they say, well, now you have to have electronic medical records, right? So now you're turned upside down again. And then we have value-based care, and that changes your focus again. So it's that constant change that hospitals have to be worried about, and then how do you change that infrastructure and what you're doing to be able to accommodate new reimbursement guidelines. Probably one of the biggest changes that hospitals don't have to deal with, but some of you like to work for Hillron and others, is all of a sudden a dramatic change in market share through innovation by somebody else. And maybe a good example of that is when I was working for Cordis and Johnson & Johnson Company, our primary product line was coronary stents. We had a 95% market share, and we were protected by patents and other things. And competition came in, regardless of our barriers to entry, and we dropped to a 5% market share. And so you think about that kind of upheaval of somebody coming in with better technologies, what that does, because all of a sudden you're thinking, hey, all those things that we were supposed to change and we didn't, now it's costing us. We've lost a lot of people, we've had to cut salaries, we've had to cut staffing levels, and it took a while to get back again through innovation, but that's still another driver. I mean, what's in the marketplace that's going to come up and cause us to have to change the way we do business? So I know that those are kind of, in my view, it's always that external environmental factors that are driving change. But maybe some of my other fellow panelists can talk about some of the internal issues, or maybe some of the people in the audience can talk about some of the internal issues that are driving change within their organizations. Anything come to mind that?
I can't go
No.
ahead. So the biggest changes that I'm seeing as we're working with multiple different hospitals and systems across the country is you're either buying or you're being bought. And so we're seeing an increase, or at least I'm seeing an increase in systemness across the country. And I'm not convinced yet that we know how to work as a system, because we're a bunch of hospitals that have done things by ourselves individually for years. And now we're having to learn, how do I drive that so that hospital A, B, C, and D, so that we can load balance, so that we can ensure that the patient's taken care of in the right manner. And so we saw the emergence of the command centers and some of those other things that are being put in place, and the centralization of staffing that goes with that, the centralization of bed placement that goes with that, and so it's a huge change for individual hospitals in dealing with systemness. And then how do we standardize our work around that? And that's one of the challenges that we're starting to see when we start to talk about lots of hospitals. Because here's what I hear. Well, we're a 700-bed hospital and they're only 150. Okay, that's great. But how do we systematize ourselves? How do we work together so that we can ensure that all our patients are taken care of to the highest standard? And that's really probably the biggest thing that I see is that coming together of multiple hospitals.
You know, I think for us, a really massive change that we're seeing is that the workforce has fundamentally changed. And COVID obviously ripped the Band-Aid off. But I do believe, coming from another market, this was going to happen in this market eventually. I remember I came here in March of 2020, and COVID was just starting to take off. And I remember coming to Memorial and asking, how many vacancies do we have in the cath lab? 0. How many vacancies do we have in surgical techs? 0. And I was absolutely blown away, because the market I had come from was very, very difficult to fill those kinds of spots. And so Memorial has always had a very strong culture, a lot of people waiting to work here. And because of COVID, our business has fundamentally changed. We had major staffing deficits like everybody else. And so I think realizing that things have permanently changed has been tough for us to adapt to, and embracing that change. You're going to have a lot of new people in the workforce. You're not going to have those experienced people. And so how are we training those people? How are we getting them up to speed? And how are we helping our staff, and especially our physicians, realize that you're not going to have experienced people applying for jobs. You're going to be training new people constantly. So just adapting to those changes has been something that we've really had to reckon with.
Yeah, great. And to Robert, to your point, even though you're the 700-bed hospital and, you're against the 100, your primary competitor is at 150-bed hospital, all the M&A activity that's going on around you, that other competitor can quickly turn into a 400, 800-bed hospital very quickly. So while you focus on your systemist, you also have to, in conjunction, look at all the market dynamics and it constantly changing and really adapt to those changes as well. Peter, so what lessons have you learned, both for better and for worse, about how to engage your administrative and clinical teams, in your change efforts?
Yeah, I think change really begins and ends with trust. If you don't have trust and you don't have relationships, you're not going to go anywhere. Most organizations are relationship driven. I have never seen an organization that's as relationship driven as Memorial. And so forming those relationships has been incredibly important. I had to change my approach when I came here. As I said, when I came here, COVID was literally taking off. Nobody knew me. I inherited a very experienced, very capable team that was already managing the crisis incredibly well and didn't need my help. And so it was a little tough for me to come here because so certain days I would say, I don't know if they need me. This is a great team. They're handling it really well. But slowly but surely you find ways to get to know people, develop those relationships, to take a back seat, to let the professionals do what they do, and then find ways to add value and really develop those relationships and increase that speed of trust.
Do you find it, when in your approach with the clinical versus administrative teams, do you find that you have to change your approaches with both teams?
Very much so. I'm lucky. I grew up in a family of healthcare people. I am the only person in my immediate family who's not clinical. My dad was a doctor, mom was a nurse, oldest sister's a speech and language pathologist, brother's a doctor, sister's a nurse. And so I think I speak clinician pretty well, but I also know that healthy dose of skepticism, especially somebody with an MBA, that they would encounter. My sister, who still works as a nurse, is a great dose of reality for me. We talk a lot, and she works at a large hospital in Indianapolis. And typically, she'll text me or call me and say, "Do you know what our stupid administrators did today?" And she's like, "I hope you're not one of them." And I try to keep that in check and bring that perspective to know my audience really well, because it's a very different experience dealing with clinicians versus administrative teams.
I feel your pain. My brother-in-law is a physician, my sister-in-law is a physician, my husband's a chiropractor, so it's like, do you know what our administrative team, enlighten me, what is the next thing that they have done to piss you off? So yes, it is a hard balance to meet. Richard, in your perspective, what is the most important thing someone in your position can do to really advance successful change?
One of the more interesting things that I'm finding when I would come into a hospital, there might be one person in strategic planning. And I'm walking into these meetings today and knowing that even in Memorial, you've got a whole bunch of people that are in strategic planning and looking at data. You come out of a strategic planning background too.
Yeah,
and I'm great about this too.
Yeah.
So more and more, we're starting to become a little bit more relevant. And to answer your question, I think it's all about data and information. Fact-based decision-making is really critical. And to become more critical as technologies change. And we'll talk a little bit probably about artificial intelligence and the meaning of that. But at the end of the day, I think getting administrators to become more fact-based and understanding that there's tons of data out there, particularly in the state of Florida. We know everything about everybody. In terms of physicians, we can tell you the age of their patients on average, the zip codes of the patients, the hospitals that they're going to, their financial class, everything that you want to know is out there and available. But there's other, I think, information systems that have to start coming into play. So I would lobby for a chief innovation officer. I don't know if you guys have one at Memorial. do, right? And I've seen them start to pop up as well. Because I just think there's so much innovation coming down the pipe, whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's other mechanisms to help with fact-based decision-making, that would be the greatest value I think that I bring is to helping executives look at the data and understand the best way to make decisions, whether it's where to put outpatient facilities or what service lines to grow and so on.
And what do you need from others in the organization in order to really make that change?
You know, I think it's getting others to assume what the value that you bring to the table is going to be. And I think that there's several different types of executives, and some of them just do it based on their gut, and they are very successful at doing it because they know the marketplace. And so I think that as the data analysts out here and strategic planners have to recognize too that sometimes gut is not bad, but you have to be able to convince people within the organization at least to give management the tools to make a decision, whether it's based upon their gut or whether it's going to be based fact-based. And I've got a couple of stories, I think, of where entrepreneurs have won the day. One of them happens to be sitting at Cordis, and everybody, including all the key opinion leader physicians, said, do not bring this product to market. But he had conviction, and he brought the product to market, and at the end of the day, it was very successful. So I kind of learned from that there was just some people that may not necessarily be oriented towards fact-based decisions, but through their own business acumen, get it right. So I think there's that balance between them.
I agree. Robert, can you share a story of an effort that was really just less successful than you anticipated?
How long do we have?
You're limited to 2 minutes.
So, yeah, let me go back. So I was at the bedside for about 15 years, primarily in acute care, and I was like a lot of nurses, right? You were pretty good at your job, so you got promoted. And then they put you in a new position. And one of the things in my new position was I was asked a question, and I said, and the question was, Rob, we think we need to centralize transport. And I said, okay, sounds great. And we started this project, and we started the research, and we started to look at everything, and we ended up buying a piece of software that actually helped us with bed placement, with transport, and with EDS. And you know what? I learned a few things in that because it was my first project, and I had some help. And but I was missing some key things. I didn't have a project manager, and I learned that, you know what? Any big project that I have, I really need a project manager because they're key in doing all of those things. I learned that, you know what? The voice of the customer is important. We made a decision that this is what we were going to do, but I didn't include those people. And I take that really seriously to heart nowadays because you got to talk to the customers. They're the people that are going to use whatever you're doing. If it's a process, if it's a system, it doesn't matter. And then the third key takeaway was sustainability. It's great to finally get to the end of a project. It's great to put that project in place. But I've really learned there's this thing called drift. And we like to do what we've always done. And so we tend to drift away. And until we put sustainability into a process, we're going to lose that process over time. Those are probably the three biggest things that I learned when I first started thinking about flow and project management and process improvement.
Great, thanks. Peter, do you have a similar story? And, in hindsight, what would you have done differently?
Sure. So earlier in my career, I worked at a hospital in Boulder, Colorado. And if you know Boulder, it is probably the healthiest place on earth. Everybody's very fit, very, very health conscious. And I'm a firm believer that you gotta lead by example, and we're in the wellness business, so we should be promoting wellness. So I had the very bright idea that I took upon myself to take a deep fryer out of the cafeteria. And that basically created a small revolt. And the people that I least expected to have a big problem with it were the most vocal. I had a pharmacist who was a professional triathlete who ripped me up and down. And so that lesson really proved to me the value of change management, because I didn't use any change management. I thought I would do this all on my own without telling anyone, and everyone would think it was such a wonderful idea, and that clearly wasn't it. So to make the best of it, I did sincerely apologize, and we held a free French Fry Friday day where I put on a chef outfit and I served it myself. And so I think by owning it, apologizing, repenting, and laughing about it, and moving on, it helped. But I had an executive coach one time that told me that he felt that to be a successful leader in healthcare, you really have to be a master of change management, and I found that to be a very true statement.
Right. Back to the listening to your stakeholders. So Robert, what are some best practices really in your experience to really drive change throughout the whole organization?
So as I think about best practices, I really think about what are the pieces that I need or that are needed in order to drive a great project. And I'll start with an engaged leader, right? Someone who's excited about the project, someone who's engaged, someone who's willing to participate. But then we need to understand what we're trying to do. Because I think a lot of times we say, hey, this is what we're going to do, but we don't think through what that really means. So if we're going to create a use case on something, then how are we going to measure it? How do we know that it's actually successful? Or is it just another thing that we're doing without putting anything into process? So I think about, as we're defining the project, that, you know what, we define it and we create a good use case for it. We then understand the project, and then we have a way to measure it when we're done. And along the way, that we're measuring pieces of it. So that entire process becomes really structured throughout. And if we need to adjust, we can adjust, but it's almost a standard work kind of process in my mind, because we now have steps that we're really going through. And you've heard me say this, engage your end users. You gotta hear from people that are gonna be using the project, the process, or the product, whatever it is. And they have to buy into it, right? One of the things I tell people all the time is, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And so you have to help them understand why we want to do this. It's imperative that people understand the why behind things. And you'll find that I don't care if you're a physician, I don't care what your role is, you're a healthcare worker, you're an EVS staff, your housekeeping. If you don't understand why we're doing something, it generally doesn't make any sense. And that's when you get those conversations about those managers that are changing things for no reason at all, right? And they don't know what they're doing. Well, they might know what they're doing, they just didn't share it with you. And so that brings me to communication. And I think you have to communicate. And I always tell people, we've got to communicate early and we've got to communicate often. And any time that we plan on taking other steps or other processes, we need to, before we roll something out, we've got to tell people what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so that they understand. And then, of course, we have to train them, right? So many times we do things and we expect people to just know, right? Because that's their job, so they should know that. But the reality is, at the end of the day, if we're not taking the time to educate them and help them along the path so that they start to buy into the product, because now they understand the why, now they've had the conversation, and now they're getting the training, and we're going to be more successful with our project as we go through that whole piece. And then the last thing that I would say is find influencers, right? We like to drive things from the top down, and that works sometimes. But at the end of the day, you have people that are incredibly influential within your organization who don't have titles, but everybody listens to them. Find those people, get their buy-in, and they'll sell it for you. And that's really what I think about from a best practice implementation process.
All great points. You know, in addition to, you know, the tracking and serving the purpose of gauging whether it's really working or not, or the success of the project, also it allows you to get the buy-in from those folks that perhaps initially didn't have, you know, weren't really sold on the idea, or perhaps were on the fence. You know, once you're able to show, you know, the success incrementally, like that also allows them to see the value as well. And so along the course, they can also buy in. So that's great. Peter, what leadership skills do you feel are most important to really create a culture that embraces change?
So I think as leaders, we all have different styles and strengths. And I've always felt very strongly that you have to be self-aware of your strengths and play to those. And so for me personally, it's being very hands-on, it's being very genuine, very down to earth, honest, and sometimes brutally transparent. Both Robert and I found out, are Midwesterners, and that's typically how we are. That's our personality. We're pretty self-deprecating, we're pretty transparent. But I think having that self-awareness to know what those strengths are is very important. And so one of the things you have to do as a leader is you have to think about the future. So what's coming? Where do we want to go, and how are we going to get there? But you've got to be able to translate that vision. And so if you don't have the trust and the credibility, as I said earlier, you're not going to be able to do that. And you especially can't come in and start making major changes without that. And then I think also as leaders, you know, you really got to walk the walk and talk the talk. And so, for example, people like to have their input heard. This afternoon, I sent a very short, very open-ended survey to our department leaders. We have about 160 department leaders that meet every month. And I very much remember when I was in their shoes going to department leader meetings thinking how boring they are and how I could be doing so many other more productive things. And so I always tell people, if I'm going to take you away from what you're doing for an hour to an hour and a half, I want to make it meaningful. And so we sent them a very open-ended survey to get their feedback. And we're going to act upon that feedback. We wanted to know, are these a good use of your time? What are you hearing? What are you not hearing that you want to hear? Are these meetings too often? Are they too short? Are they too long? And so I think if people know that you're listening to them and you will act upon that feedback, it's very important that they feel heard.
That's awesome. Richard had alluded earlier to healthcare disruptors. With the rise of AI, Robert, with the emergence of AI and all the facets and its implications to healthcare, how can it be incorporated into the change management process, in your perspective?
So I get pretty excited when we talk about artificial intelligence.
I can see it already from here.
That's what I do, and really, you know, you hear about the good and the bad, but at the end of the day, what we want to do with our AI is improve our efficiency and drive organizational change, right? At the end of the day, we want people to work to yes. That's what it comes down to. And so how do we today take our information and automate it so that we simplify the tasks, whether that means we're automating communication, where people used to make calls, we're automating processes that we no longer need people to do things with, right? We start to become aware of prescriptive data, right? So that we can say, hey, I know what's coming. Or we start to think about predictive data, right? And now we know, what can I do with that? So we can start to put processes in place. And knowing those two things, we can do something that most hospitals can't do today. We can become proactive versus reactive. Because I can tell you, when I spent my 10 years in leadership and ran around a hospital, I made a lot of phone calls and I put out a lot of fires. But what if I knew that fire was coming and I could now address it before it became a fire? And I could start to react to things and address things prior to all of that happening. Because I have a team of data scientists who can tell me when things will happen, right? In a hospital, what's my census going to be? Oh, how long should that patient be here? Oh, what is their disposition? all those things that can now be predicted. So when I went to nursing school 30 years ago, one of the things they told me right away, right? Discharge starts on? Thank you. And I'm going to look at you today and I'm going to say, really? Do we practice that? But what if I know those pieces that I just talked about? If I know how long you're going to be here and where you're going to go, now I really can do those things. So having AI and artificial intelligence in place allows me to do those things, to improve that efficiency so that I can increase that capacity, so that I don't have patients boarding in my ED, because I know that patients that board in EDs have higher readmission rates. I know that patients that board in EDs have higher mortality rates. I know that patients who lay in beds who have discharge orders have a higher risk of falling and a higher safety problem. And if I can fix some of those things, am I not doing what I signed up to do? And that is to serve people? Because that's really what we all signed up to do, right? We're in healthcare, we serve people, right? We may not carry a tray on our arm and bring you food, but that's who we are. And so if we can do that efficiently, effectively, and safely, that's what we want to do. And that's what I think about AI and what AI can do for us. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we haven't even started talking about large language models yet. And I'll leave it there.
I haven't seen Robert smile this big since the beginning of this session. Thanks, Robert. Richard, what is your take on the role of AI in change management?
Sure. First, just to back up a little bit, I think that there's a lot of nomenclature issues around the use of the term AI. It could be machine learning, it could be just good software that helps decision support. So all of those things boils down to one thing: how does it impact you, and how does it impact your job, and how does it impact patient care? I don't think any of us are going to lose our jobs to AI. I think we may lose our jobs to people that use AI. So one of the things I would urge people here to figure out is, how can AI going forward, how can that be used to further the hospital's mission, patient care, and so on? In terms of AI rollout, I think it's going to be interesting. If you take a step back, picture a normal distribution curve and how technology gets rolled out. You cannot afford to be at the forefront of every technological change. So in some cases, you may be an early adopter. Some cases, you may wait until the technology proves itself, and then you invest. And sometimes you may be a laggard. So just as an example, I may have bought a Tandy Radio Shack Model 1 when it first came out, but I wasted my money because 6 months, 9 months, a year later, there was a Model 2 that was much better, and then eventually there was an IBM that was even much better than that. So the way I think AI is going to roll out is going to be, first, follow the money. And so I think it may end up rolling out first on the financial side, even though the patient care side may be a better use of AI for a whole variety of reasons. But picture algorithms that would help you correct patient bills before they go out. Patient errors in patient billing is still a huge issue. So that would be one piece of it. Another piece of it is, let's say you're an HMO contractor and you're using AI. Do you think that the managed care companies are also going to be using AI? Of course they will. So at the end of the day, if you don't employ it, and the managed care companies are doing it to optimize their contracts, and by that way AI is going to be scrubbing contracts all along the way to find out the best terms, you're going to lose. And so I think it behooves people in management in the hospitals to understand this technology, what it can do, and where can it be used to get the most effective bang for the buck. So it's going to be interesting. We're at the very forefront of these types of things, and I'm excited about it the same way Rob is, because all of a sudden we data geeks are going to get even a better seat at the table when it comes to management decisions.
Great, thank you. Peter, aside from your deep fryer incident, what are some common barriers that you have, experienced in regarding change management, and how did you overcome those barriers?
Yeah, so the deep fryer incident goes back to several common themes. really a lack of clarity. You know, what's the reason for the change? What are we trying to achieve? What's my role in the process? And so if people don't understand that, they're going to be likely to resist that change. Poor communication. Communication's got to be clear and consistent. And the reality is nurses, radiology techs don't read emails, and they should. They've got better things to do. This is a very complex place, and so getting that clear communication out is very difficult, and there's no such thing as too much communication, especially in a place like this. The cultural fear of change. So a lot of organizations can be very resistant to change, and healthcare is notorious for being resistant to change. And so one of the phrases you typically don't want to hear is, well, we've always done it that way. And that's something you're always trying to get around. Absence of buy-in. So if leaders aren't committed to change, no one's going to buy in. I always tell our A team, I respect people disagreeing with each other respectfully. I want us to push each other. But when we walk out of that room, we got to be in lockstep and support each other and have each other's backs. And then, of course, change fatigue. And there's definitely something as too much change. It can be overwhelming and people can become resistant again. The organization I came from was unbelievably successful from a financial standpoint and very, very, very well run operationally. However, that success came on the backs of the staff. It was constant change, always doing more. Ratios always changing, never enough. And quite honestly, it harmed the organization. People were shocked when I left, but then literally 6 months after I left, I started getting a lot of text messages and calls, and people said, how did you know? How did you know? What did you know was going on? So I think you got to be mindful of the pace and the rate of change you're putting on people, because it can clearly cause cracks to form in the foundation.
Great, that's a good point that you brought. Change fatigue. Let's take a second to talk about that. Robert, in your experience, have you ever encountered too much change, perhaps all at once?
So, absolutely, and I will tell you that so I've seen it in several hospitals, because when I first started, working in the consulting business and doing that, one of the things that I was pretty gung-ho. I get pretty excited about things, and I'd say, hey, we got to do these 12 things, and you know what? We started to try them. But at the end of the day, it was just too much. So I have a new approach now. And in my executive meetings, we may talk about, hey, you know what, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity. But when we're done, we force rank. And we look at those opportunities and we say, okay, what's the most important to this organization right now? And what are we going to focus on for the next 30 days? Maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days. We may not know the answer to that yet, depending on how that change progresses. But we pick one or two things, and that's what we focus on to avoid that too much at one time. It's one thing I need you to think about, right? This is what, as a unit manager, as a director, you need to focus on today. And then, a different part of the hospital, maybe it's their staffing. This is what we're going to focus on. And so we're not introducing too much at one time because we force ranked. It doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities out there, because there will be, right? I can find a ton of them all the time. Most people in this room can. But that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do right now. And we just need to find the right time. And by having the customer write them, it becomes their priority, not mine. And that's key.
Thanks, Robert. We talked a lot about needing the trust, needing the buy-in, making sure that the communication is there, it's effective. Richard, in your perspective, how does the organizational structure impact the changes required to meet the operational needs and meet the strategic objectives?
To me, organizational structure is just about everything when it comes to making changes that are strategic. And I'll give a couple examples of that. When I was working for Johnson & Johnson, our coronary division was by far the biggest part of our business. And there were other products that we had that dealt with all the vascular system that was not part of the heart, it was peripheral. But it didn't seem to grow. And the focus for sales, for finance, for everybody was on the biggest piece of the business, not the piece of the business that could grow the most. And so being head of the market research department, I kept telling my team, hey, we're missing this golden opportunity. And I happen to have the ear of some of the higher beings within the J&J structure. And ultimately what they decided to do, with the help of McKinsey, because by the way, internal folks know nothing, the consultants know everything. And so with the help of McKinsey, they came in and they said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to divide your company up into two. And we're going to take the endovascular division, we're going to give it its own president, we're going to give it its own budget, we're going to give it its own sales force, and by the way, we're going to move it to New Jersey out of Miami. That division became the fastest growing division within J&J. So by giving its own focus, it put the spotlight where it should have been, which was on growth opportunities. It created more customers and things like that. And I know the majority of you here are in hospitals. So how would organizational changes within a hospital structure impact your ability to grow? Well, how about the movement from inpatient to outpatient? Right? Your assets are all in hospitals. And it's very difficult to get movement to say, hey, we're not going to give you so much money anymore on the inpatient side because the growth is all outpatient. We need to buy doctors' practices. We need to put in primary care sites. We need to do all of this other stuff that we're not focused in today. And so I know that there are some hospital systems that have done this. They basically took their organizational structure and they bifurcated it. Politically, it's really tough to do, right? Because you've got a CEO and you got a COO that's over this big behemoth organization. Right now you're telling them we're going to diminish your power. So there are definitely barriers to making those kinds of organizational changes that can have the most meaningful long-term impact on the organization.
Great, thanks, Richard. Robert alluded to it earlier. When implementing change, the sustainability of it is key, right? It's very important that it doesn't just, it's not started, the project is not started, and then at completion, it just lasts for about 2 months thereafter. You want to make sure that the processes that you've incorporated last over time. So Peter, can you give us an example how you have managed to sustain change over time in your organization?
Sure. So, focus is key, and the change cannot be perceived as the flavor of the week. And you're not able to know if you're having an impact unless you're able to measure it. So you've got to look at your current metrics, and then you've got to look at the baseline to see what's happening. You got to be able to report it out to the stakeholders, and then you've got to recognize and celebrate those accomplishments. So as an example of that, capacity management, length of stay and throughput is our biggest challenge here. I'm not proud of it, but we hold a lot of patients in our ER. As Robert said, he's speaking my language. I've seen it as high as 110 admitted ED holds, and I've seen it as low as 5. But normally it hovers in about that 60 range. But we cover, and we really got serious about it several months ago, and we cover those metrics every week at our A-team meeting. And we also do it every day at our daily hospital-wide huddle. And so because of a lot of those efforts and a lot of hard work, we've seen our numbers come down. We've seen those holds reduce, and we've seen a pretty significant length of stay reduction, which is a big deal for us. And so one of the other things that we've been able to do is, because we're so reliant on a lot of our vendor partners, such as hospitalists, such as emergency room doctors, we've found ways to incentivize the outcomes that we need, and then also find ways to align to get to those shared metrics that we have. And so that can be through shared risk arrangements, financial incentives for hitting those metrics, finding win-win situations so that when we win, they win, and we're incentivizing the behavior that we need, because clearly, as Robert said, bad things happen when patients hold in EDs, and so that's been our single biggest focus here. And thankfully, we've seen some sustainable change.
Great. Obviously, the goal when you do the change management process and go through it, it's always a win-win end goal, right? But sometimes, your gut sometimes is wrong. Peter, can you tell us about an experience where you've realized, what you initially thought was wrong, or perhaps you had to change a long-standing belief, and how did your team react to your change in stance?
So, has anyone in this room heard of Intuitive, the robots? Is there anyone from Intuitive here? Good, okay. So Intuitive makes surgical robots, and to be honest, they've been my sworn enemy for about the last 10 years. They're known for having very aggressive sales reps, and often those sales reps are very good at pitting the surgeons against the hospital and forcing you to buy a couple $1 million robots. And I've been hoping that robotic surgery would be a fad and go away, and that isn't going to happen. And I actually went to an Intuitive conference a few weeks ago, and I had the epiphany that the reality is that many service lines and specialties are going pretty much exclusive for the robots, such as general surgery, such as GYN, such as thoracic and urology. And the other thing too is in the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a lot of doctors out there that only know how to use the robot. And so the reality is it's here to stay. And so, as Kenny Rogers would say, you got to know when to fold it. So I came back from this conference, fully accepted the defeat, and I told my team that. And I had a couple of my team members that were floored. And but I also think that the ability to admit when you're wrong is one of the most powerful things a leader can do. And again, I keep talking about that trust. And I think the expression on my CNO's face when I told her I was wrong and she thanked me for being willing to admit it was pretty powerful. And I think that continually moves our relationship forward. So I have lost that battle. We're dramatically increasing the use of robots across the system, just like everybody else is. And I fully admit I was very wrong.
That's great. I agree with you. Admitting you're wrong as a leader is definitely a virtue. That's awesome. And I did count how many times you've said trust throughout this panel session, and it's 13. Wow. Great. So with that concludes all of our questions. Does the audience have any questions for our panelists?
Absolutely.
Great.
My name's Javier. I work in strategic sourcing. I use iterative and I use AI every day, whether it's to develop scopes or revise scopes or look at requirements from our customers. What are your thoughts and where that's going to go with large language models and how that's going to affect, for example, supply chain effectiveness for healthcare systems?
Wow, that's quite a question. I have to think about that for just a second, but so I think today, right, when we talk about large language models today, we're really allowing that language, that data to come to conclusions for us. One of the things that, as we've worked with that, I will tell you real honestly, is that it's hit and miss. I think it's pretty early still. And so that's why we haven't rolled anything out, and you'll see that. Where do I think it'll go in the future? I really think as we start to look at large language models, we're going to be able to scrutinize the data better because we're no longer going to be able to, we're no longer pulling out an Excel spreadsheet. We're no longer looking at those pieces of data, but we're going to have all the data in front of us and AI-driven decisions made with us. I don't ever think we'll get to a point where we allow the AI to drive the decision 100%, but I think to give us a concrete recommendation is where we'll end up, and then it'll be a matter of I think it'll come to a point where they can even look at product and say, hey, you know what, they have these types of issues, and so those things can be addressed, and my hope is that those companies that have opportunities identified for them, that they then improve those models as we go forward, and we end up with system software supplies that are actually better than they are today because of it. That's just my thought.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Charles.
There is, and I know Richard and I have discussed this a couple of times, but there's so much data out there as there is news. How much do you believe that is correct? And we seem to be relying on a lot of data or AI. And the question is, who proves that the AI is correct that we're all relying on, and how do you know? And the other question relating to data, more like to Richard particularly, because he's like a data geek, and when it comes to it, is there so many data sets out there relating to financial information, relating to hospitals and doctors and patients? I also ask the question, what do you believe and how do you know it's correct?
Well, first, I think that the internal data is the best source of data because that's data that you can control. I think what people fail to realize sometimes, a lot of what we get is really sample data, right? So sometimes people are looking at market sizes and things like that, but there's no national database that's all payer data. There's Medicare data that's pretty big and good because it's actually being reported. So I think that's one piece of it, is to understand maybe where the weaknesses are. So if I was depending upon just selective data sets, I have to understand that I'm only dealing with, for example, Medicare fee-for-service data. How do I fill in the gaps to come up with normative data? Unfortunately, sometimes it's as much art as it is science. So I think when we're looking at AI and other technologies, the question becomes, are we happy with a 90% confidence interval or 80% confidence interval? And I think coming back to some of the other points, are we going to let systems like AI develop everything for us, and we're just going to take that information carte blanche? To me, that's like looking at some of these self-driving cars and saying, I'm going to let that self-driving car make all my decisions for me. I'm not going to do that, right? There has to be a certain amount of human intervention, I think, in what we're going to be doing. So I think it's very assistive in a lot of ways. Has anybody here looked at Bing Image Creator by chance? It's free. Yeah, it's fascinating. I used to spend hours looking just for the right graphic for presentation, something that would be free. And I could just go to Bing Image Creator and say, hey, produce this image for me. Make it like Leroy Neiman style painting of business people running in the city. It'll come back and it'll give me something perfect. So what's interesting to me, though, is that gets the creative juices flowing. It opens up opportunities for me to say, hey, here's what the machine is telling me. Do I like it? Do I want to use it? Do I want to tweak it? And so I think for a lot of things and a lot of decision making that we're going to do, whether it's machine learning assisted or AI assisted, there's still going to be a certain amount of human intervention based upon what we know. And it comes back to my comments sometimes about the entrepreneurs and the business people that have a gut and they know it's right and they're going to follow that regardless of maybe what data and other systems may be telling them to do. So we'll see. It's early. And we don't know at the end of the day where this is going to go, but we'll see.
Great. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to ask this question to the CEO from Memorial, right? People tend to resist change, even if it's for the good. So what innovative strategies have you used? I'm really interested to find out, to address this resistance to change, which we seem not to be able to get away from.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you really got to understand, where is that resistance coming from? And often if there's resistance, then we haven't done our jobs with managing that change. And so I think you got to go backwards. And the old adage of you got to go slow on the front end to go fast on the back end really applies. And so to manage that resistance, I think you got to understand, why are people against this? What am I not communicating? So I think you have to have the ownership of that to be able to address it. And then, you know, as I said earlier, I think you got to recognize your audience and know your audience. And so the reason that a surgeon may be resisting something is probably completely different from the reason that the surge tech is resisting it. So I think you really got to go back to the drawing board and try to get those people on board. And the reality is, you're not always going to get everyone on board, but at least if people can feel like they've been heard, they've been listened to, and they've had a voice in the process, they'll accept it much better if it doesn't always go their way.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Jenna.
Hi, my name is Rachel Thomas. I'm the Transplant Administrative Director here. So I guess for any of you, I think about the aging workforce and the young people coming in, my own children, and just the extreme difference in values. You know, I don't think the youngest generation is wrong for saying, I'm leaving early and taking my kids trick-or-treating. I'm taking this day off, I'm doing that. I can remember my first job, after a year, I could have 3 sick days. And I never took a sick day because I didn't have any. I didn't know, you can just not go to work and just not get paid. And, you know, the work ethic that I grew up with, that a lot of us grew up with, very different, but not necessarily wrong, some of the new values coming in. Just wondered how each of you or any of you help bridge that gap with the more old school mentality, being frustrated with the newer employees, or vice versa, just generically.
That's a great question, Rachel, and I don't think we've fully figured it out, and I think it's playing out before our eyes right now. You know, I think there's a lot of good information out there on the differences between the generation, and I think that you really got to understand your audience. And you know, my colleague Caitlin Stella, who's the CEO of the Children's Hospital, is great at this. And you got to have a certain type of personality working in a children's hospital. You got to have a certain type of personality to work here. We're like, put your head down, tough it out, grit your teeth, and get through it. Across the street's a little more different and a little more touchy-feely. But she's very good at pointing out the ways to appeal to the different generations. And there's no question that the younger generation, they want to feel included, they want to feel like they're making a difference, they love recognition, there's no such thing as too much recognition. And then also, one of the things we've started doing, and we do a 90-day wrap session for our new employees to make sure that they're happy, is there anything we can do? And one of the biggest things we ask them that has the most impact is, has your manager or supervisor sat down with you yet and learned about your career goals? Because so many people coming in the workforce today, they might be an acute care nurse today, but they want to be a nurse practitioner next week. And so you need to sit them down and explain that process about how that they can get there. And once they understand that, they're more likely to do that. But I think we're honestly struggling on how to deal with that because it's playing out right before our eyes. But one of the things we've done, because as I said earlier, I think COVID really fundamentally changed the workplace. And we've really tried to go back to the basics of, why are you in healthcare? What is the mission? The fact that you get to lay hands on a patient every day means something. You're not making widgets, you're getting people better. And so we really try to appeal to that sense of compassion and mission to get people back to having that dedication to the patient, to going the extra mile, to doing the things that we all come to work for every day.
I'd like to ask you a question. Are you having trouble finding sufficient staff to be able to fill roles? And maybe it's a question for you too, Peter. Are you finding enough staff?
Absolutely not. Not only, I mean, it's purely a supply and demand issue, but also the same thing is people are moving on. There are fewer and fewer career acute care nurses anymore. You know, the advisory board put out a study a couple of years ago that said basically 1/3 of new graduate nurses are going to stay at the bedside. They're going to go become nurse practitioners, they're going to become CRNAs, they're going to want to go into administration. So we just have to be able to adapt to that, and it goes back to what I said earlier. Here's the path. You might be an acute care nurse today, but if you do these things, in 5 years, you can be a nurse practitioner. But no question, we've had to adapt to those realities because that has fundamentally changed.
To me, it's interesting because I was asked a while back to give a presentation on staffing, and I am not a recruiter by any stretch of the imagination. So I looked at it from the perspective of how do you strategically change what you're doing to get the right people and to staff up. And that didn't take up too much time, but my conclusion was I asked who are the best recruiters in the world, and to me, they're football coaches. And their life depends upon the people that they're able to recruit and how they train them. And I think you need a different mindset and a different way of doing things today. When I first started working at Jackson Memorial, I don't want to give away my age, it was a long time ago, they actually had a school of nursing. And so maybe that kind of a model has to come back, where you identify where your long-term needs are going to be from a staffing perspective, and you go do your training, you pay for it in exchange for which they have to hang around for a certain period of time. So that there may be some of those old model things that we used to do that needs to come back into play. But I would urge all of you who are out there searching for staff, think like a football coach.
I went to a school of nursing
Okay.
and committed time there. Yeah,
Hospital
I would just answer. Yeah, hospital. I would
Yeah.
just say that I don't have trouble staffing, and I'm thinking more about the relationship from some of the senior managers, even physicians, like old school physicians, new people coming in. Like I'm leaving at this time, I'm coming in. Some of us staying till 7, 8, 9 because we're, just bridging some of the values gaps between the people on our pretty well-staffed workforce.
Difficult.
Thank you.
For sure.
I do think that what Peter said is really relevant there when it comes to bridging that gap. And if we help people identify their goals, then they're more willing to do things to meet those goals, right? So then they're more willing to stay a little later and do those things, knowing that they have a path to move forward on. And so, just a thought.
Thank you. Those are all great questions. Lastly, before we conclude, we did have a LinkedIn poll where we posed the question, what is the biggest change obstacle? Was it ineffective communication, resistance to change, lack of resources, or regulatory hurdles? And the number one answer was ineffective communication. So it resonates well with the responses that kept coming up in today's session. Before we end our session, I know our audience is comprised of folks at different stages in their careers. So I'd like to ask the panelists, one, what was the best advice that you've gotten in your career? And two, what personal advice would you share with the audience tonight? Robert, you want to start?
I'd be happy to. So, the best piece of advice I got when I started to work in the world of change management was, someone said this to me. They said, remember this, you can change without improving, but you can't improve without change. So we can put all kinds of stuff in place, but you know what? If you put a bad process over a good system, it's still got a bad process at the end of the day. So that meant a lot to me, and I've really kind of tried to think through that as I've gone and think about the fact that, you know what? You have to have some improvement in place in order to change. And then, best advice I can give, I'm going to go back to the communication piece, and we didn't really talk about this, but communication isn't always talking, right? Listen. Listen. Listen to the people who want the project completed and what they really want so you can define it well. Listen to the people who are going to be a part of that project and your team. Let them provide the input. And then listen to the front line and understand and help them understand what is happening and address their issues as you go forward. And you'll be much more successful on all of these projects. So those would be my 2 pieces.
Thanks, Robert. Peter?
Sure, so a couple things come to mind. First, if you have the chance, the person that you work for is really really important. So if you're lucky enough to be able to work for someone who's going to mentor you, who's going to take an interest in you, who's going to push you, who's going to give you those extra assignments, that will dramatically increase the rate of your career progression. The next thing is, don't worry about titles. For example, the system that I came from, when I was coming up, it was a very large system, and so there were often CEO opportunities available. And I remember we had a new system CEO come in, and he singled out several people and met with them, and he met with me and he said, Peter, you know, I've heard good things about you. I think you're ready to start looking at CEO opportunities. And so I started looking at CEO opportunities, and the first one that came up was in a town called Durango, Colorado, which is in a stunning and beautiful area, but it's a town of about 16,000 people in the middle of nowhere. And so I remember coming home very excited, telling my wife that they wanted me to apply for that CEO position, and I remember her looking at me and saying, I am not moving to a town of 16,000 people, 3.5 hours away from Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is the closest major city. But during that time, someone reached out to me from the flagship hospital in Denver and said, hey, the COO is going to be leaving to take another job. Would you be interested? And I thought about it, and I said, yeah. And so I actually ended up taking the chief operating officer job at the flagship over the CEO job at smaller hospitals, and that made all the difference. I got to see a much wider depth and breadth of operations, and in the long run, really propelled my career versus working at a smaller hospital in a small town. And so that was very, very impactful. And so I think a lot of times taking the long road and not being short-sighted will really pay off for you.
Thanks, Peter. Richard?
Yeah, a couple of things, particularly for the young people in the audience. 3 cardinal things that you should do. 1, learn your job better than anybody else. Be the person that people will go to when they have questions. The next, know your institution better than anybody else. So know where all the hospitals are, as an example. Know what the plan is for outpatient expansion. Know what your finances are. I mean, I'm amazed. I can go into some hospital systems and I'll ask somebody at a high level, say, so how much money did hospital A, B, and C make? And they can't tell me. So know your institutions as well as you can. And then thirdly, know what's going on in your industry. So when people have conversations with you, you know, you've got a depth of knowledge and understanding that a lot of people don't have. And it's pretty easy to do. I find Modern Healthcare is a great example. Charles's publication is a great publication to know what's going on in our local communities. So that would be, I think, a starting point. The next thing I would say is absolutely learn from the best. You know who the key opinion leaders are in your field, and you know who is working in a particular institution that has the skills and knowledge that you may know, that you may want. They may not necessarily be in your department. So if Peter's sitting alone having lunch one day and you've got some questions about the institutions or operations or how to move forward, don't be bashful. You know, he may not like this, but come sit next to him. You know, ask him and get to know him. I would say the last thing is don't underestimate the value of relationships. It's hugely important to you going forward. Being a member of ACHE is a great place to start. But it's not good just to know and come and meet with your friends. You got to make sure that you shake hands with everybody and get to know who they are. So those would be my keys to success.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our panel session, Implementing Successful Organizational Change in Hospitals and Healthcare Organizations. Let's give another round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Peter, Richard, and Robert, you guys did great. Thank you, and have a great night.
So a couple of things before we leave. Our panel was awesome. Thank you guys so much. As a token of our appreciation, we'll be making, I'm sorry, Charles. Charles is recording for our website. So as a token of our appreciation, we will make a donation to the Healthcare Leadership Fund at HEALHCARE National. So thank you all. Thank you to Charles and Carlos who put on all of our education events for the year. This is our last face-to-face credit for the year. We do have some great events coming up. Next week, on Wednesday, we have a networking event down in the Brickell area at Rosa Sky. So if you're available, please join us there. Oh, yes, thank you. December 1st at the Signature Grand, we will be doing a CEO roundtable breakfast for our members only. So if you're not a member and you want to come to that event, please become a member. We have 8 CEOs from the area who will be doing like a speed dating type of breakfast. And then lastly, in December, we'll have our holiday networker. So look out information for that. Please take our survey, evaluate tonight's program. The QR code is on your tables, and thank you all.